which I'm very excited to have been doing this together with David Bright and Ignacio and also Danny. Yeah, we're working together on this webinar series, which is also part of a PDW we will be organizing and hosting at the Academy of Management in August this year. So very excited to kick off with the first one. And David will be working with me today with the slides. So maybe you could go to the next slide, David. Yeah, so it's from the Organization Development and Change division. So for those of you who are new to the division, welcome. Very excited to have you here, and of course also all members. Very excited to have you here today. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see the webinar series. So this is the first one of our series, and what we would like to do is have a series in which we invite 2 to 3 panelists each time, in which we can together from different perspectives explore the foundations of knowledge for research and ODC practices that relate to vibrant, healthy, and flourishing teams, organizations, and communities. And with that, we would also like to have different inputs and perspectives, as I mentioned. And also we would like to share resources with one another and suggestions about how particular perspective can relate or relates to the foundational elements of ODC. And also an important outcome for the ODC division is to create on our ODC Hive. So the ODC website also has an ODC Hive, and we'd like to create resources based on this webinar series as well, in which we can post on the ODC Hive and also to increase our community engagement, not only during the annual meeting, but also see if we can do this throughout the year, and also what we as a division can offer to our members and people who are interested in joining and becoming involved with ODC. So this is one way in which we hope to increase our community engagement. And towards the end of this, or at the end of this first webinar, we will also share in the chat an evaluation survey. And one of the questions there is also if you would like to share any resources that you have as a participant, so that we can also take away this information again for the ODC Hive. And of course, we'd also like to get some feedback on the event itself, but I will get back to that towards the end of the event. Maybe just before we get started and before I briefly introduce our panelists, just a bit of background information on people that registered today for the webinar. I don't know if everyone will be able to make it. Some indicated they're very interested in the webinar, but will not be able to join, particularly at this time. But David is also recording it, so it will also be shared on the ODC website, and I think maybe also on the YouTube channel. But in any case, we will make this available as well afterwards. And it might be nice to see from the 127 registrations that we have a mix of different backgrounds of participants joining us today. And then maybe I can move on to introducing our panelists, David. Thank you. So we have 3 panelists here today who will each contribute knowledge and experience from a different perspective. So we have Dr. Jody Hoffer-Gittell, who is a professor at Heather School at, I hope I pronounced it correctly, Brandeis University. And you're also the faculty director of the Relational Coordination Collaboration, and the co-founder and board member of Relational Coordination Analytics. And you've developed relational coordination theory. So very excited to have you here today and to hear more about this and to share your perspective on this in relation to ODC. And I would also like to welcome Dr. Lindsey Godwin for joining us and for being here today. A professor at the Stiller School of Business and the academic director of the Cooper Ryder Center for Appreciative inquiry. So also very excited to hear your perspective on ODC. And then we also have Dr. Steven Caddy joining us as our third panelist. So welcome, and also thank you for your willingness to join us today. Steven is a professor at Bowling Green State University, and he's also founding director of the doctoral program in ODC at Smithhurst College of Business. So yeah, also very interesting to have you here today. So thank you very much.
Yep.
And then I think we can move on with our first panelist presentation. So we'll have three presentations first by each of our panelists, and then we have the opportunity to have a panel discussion. We received some questions up front, and there's also opportunity to ask questions, of course, during the presentation, and we can take some of them. It depends how much questions there are, of course, up in the panel discussion. So first of all, I'd like to give the floor now to Dr. Jody. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Melanie, for a wonderful setup here. Wanted to start by saying hello, and I'm active in multiple divisions of the Academy of Management, but I'm particularly fond of organizational development and change. With that, let's go to the next slide. You see, I'm focusing today on the relational foundations of organizational development and change, and I wanted to start by saying why. I think the nature of reality, both human and the world that we live in more broadly is relational. So I would argue we live in a highly interdependent world in terms of socially, economically, environmentally, evolutionarily, emotionally. Some of that became particularly evident, I think, during the pandemic, when even though we were isolated in many ways, the interdependence and how much we influence each other, even at the kind of biological level, became really apparent, and the supply chains breaking down made it clear how interdependent we are around the globe. So two comments on this, starting with Mary Parker Follett. She wrote a lot about this relatedness, and I credit her with the relational ontology. She says, through circular response, we are creating each other all the time. And she obviously goes a lot further than that, but I've added to that, relationships matter at the most basic level. As human beings, we exist as members of collectives, and we survive only if we're accepted and recognized by others starting at birth. We're thus interdependent, both emotionally and physically, at the most basic level of survival. And this became apparent to me maybe more dramatically than in some other ways of growing up, but growing up on a farm, there's a lot of, it's very clear how dependent you are both on the earth and on other people. So just wanted to start with that ontological stance. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for organizational development and change? I think it just means that relationships matter, and they can make it, we have to be attentive to relationships as we go about engaging in organizational development and change. So I'll just suggest one theory for doing that. Relational coordination is a theory that came out of my dissertation research, and it's first of all a validated construct, but it's also a theory of performance and a theory of change. And according to this theory, relationships are always shaping the communication through which coordination occurs. And that happens sometimes in this highly functional way, as you can see here, when people are connected across various differences in their tasks and social and other professional identities by a sense of shared goals, shared knowledge, understanding what role each other is playing, mutual respect. And the theory is that helps to reinforce sufficiently frequent, timely, accurate problem-solving communication, which further reinforces those positive relationships. And people are connected, and that can drive performance. But alternatively, and what we often see, are people separated by siloed goals, sometimes competing goals that are not even aligned, a sense of knowing things that others don't know and don't have access to, and a lack of respect for each other's work. And that drives insufficiently frequent, sometimes delayed, inaccurate, and finger-pointing communication when things go wrong, which tend to reinforce those silos. So that construct I named took me a little while to figure out what to call it. Relational coordination. It's a mutually reinforcing process of communicating and relating for the purpose of task integration. So it's a validated construct now that is measured with the 7-item survey, and you kind of fill in the blank as to what is the work process that is being coordinated. How frequently do people in each of these groups communicate with you about flight departures was my first study. Patient care, as you'll see, was a second one. Is it timely? Is it accurate? When there's a problem, do people blame others or work with you to solve the problem? Do people in each of these groups share your goals for that work process? Do they know about the work you do? And do they respect the work that you do? And that forms a construct that I'll describe in a moment how it predicts outcomes. But the idea is that you are answering those questions with respect to each of the roles in the relevant work process. So it's actually also a network construct, as we'll see when we see a little bit later. And it's a network construct that predicts risk-adjusted performance outcomes. Flight departures were the first, the quality and efficiency of performance and turning planes around and getting them off on time and safely, et cetera, with customer satisfaction. And the second major study in this area was patient care, as we'll see on that next slide, and looking at this network of relationships around patients. And how frequent, timely, accurate problem solving, shared goals, shared knowledge, mutual respect across these boundaries. And you can imagine some of those boundaries have stronger ties than others. Others are quite fragmented. And that's a recognized challenge in the healthcare system. But again, the strength of those ties, as you see in the next slide, is a real important predictor of patient care performance, both the resource utilization, as well as the quality of outcomes and the satisfaction that people feel with their care, trust and confidence in their providers, and so on. So those relationships not only matter for our own personal well-being, but they matter in the workplace in quite an important way. So going from some of that early evidence, we developed a theory of performance where there are structures that shape these relationships that lead to these performance outcomes. And these are structures that are present in every workplace in some form. Maybe they're siloed accountability, then siloed reward structures, but they could also be shared accountability. And to the extent that they predict stronger networks of relational coordination. Do we have separate conflict resolution processes for each of these groups in that map, or is it a shared conflict resolution process such that you can start to build relationships when there's a conflict rather than they just get more fragmented, and so on? How do we select and train people? How do we design jobs so that it's apparent that part of the job is to coordinate with other people and not just to work within our own bubbles? What's the nature of leadership in bringing people together across their roles? Are there boundary spanner roles that are designed to bring people together around the work? Are meetings inclusive of the relevant parties? Do we have shared space, shared protocols, shared information systems? So the theory, as I'll describe in the next slide, is basically that these relationships of shared goals, shared knowledge, and mutual respect support high quality communication, which help people to coordinate their work across differences. And structures can be designed to support and sustain that coordination by using inclusive design principles. And together, those structures and relationships drive really important performance outcomes, including well-being of the participants, but also quality and safety and efficiency, and even learning and innovation. So then the question becomes, I think the big question for organizational development and change came to me really more recently in the last, I guess 2016 is when I first wrote about this. But how do we create intentional change if you are in one of those lower kind of places on the continuum with low levels of coordination and low levels of performance? How do we actually change that? It's rarely by just changing organizational structures. So this is where I really had to get serious about how do people change. And what we've learned from the literature and also just in the field, relationships are based on our professional and social identities, and those are very deeply embedded. One of our physician leaders said they're etched into our psyches. They're not easy to change. So participants need to somehow visualize the current state together, identify a desired state, see the whole somehow that they are a part of, and a safe space for doing this. So that gets us to the relational model of change, which Melanie was sharing, and basically saying we need some relational interventions to even start to get this sense of the whole and being part of the whole, so that we can then design the structures to support ourselves in that endeavor and achieve the desired outcome. So it's a more dynamic, less linear, more iterative model than the model of performance. And it's also at an earlier stage of research, empirical research. Next slide, please. So it also has, we have a 6 stages of change that people use in the field for implementing it, explore the context, create a change team from each of the groups represented in that process, assess the current state, reflect on our findings, develop interventions, and then implement and assess. So it's basically a continuous cycle of change for a relational change process, which I think is kind of like marrying process improvement with organizational development. I think it's pretty novel, and it's interesting to see people using it in the field with their different areas of expertise. But part of it is basically helping people to see the whole, like how are they part of this larger network, and how can they see themselves differently? If there are red lines where there need to be green lines, what are the interventions that might work there? Next slide, please. You can also do this not just within, but across organizations that are trying to accomplish something like high quality behavioral health in San Francisco by 2030, which was what this group was working on. And you can also use the survey to measure it from multiple perspectives that may not be all in the room at around the same table, and see how is it working from when you put all these perspectives together. And again, for in the next slide, looking at the organization in the context of a broader community network, that, and this was a case where people were trying to reduce youth violence in a community setting in multiple Massachusetts cities. So you can also look at how are we doing in these different dimensions? What is timely communication for you? What, you can really engage in very useful and focused conversation around each of these dimensions, which is itself an intervention. And so the theory's now been tested in over 70 industry sectors, about 36 countries. Most of them are testing the theory of performance, but more and more people are testing the theory of change. And I see that as being really exciting. It's harder to study change, as we all know, than just to predict performance, in a more static, linear way. So I really welcome thoughts about how people here study change, how you engage in change, and what is the role of relationships in that process. But I'll just share one or two more visuals. I think what we need to move to right now is, an understanding, as one of the themes for this webinar is that change is happening at multiple levels simultaneously. There's this intra and interpersonal level where actually our brains and neurosystems are changing, and there are a lot of interesting micro theories that we can use to understand that. I'm most comfortable at this organizational and interorganizational level of change, but there's also the institutional level where, what are the policies that are useful, or the norms, the broader social norms that can help to support the relational practices that are important at the organizational and the interpersonal level. So I think that's a really exciting area. I'm actually writing a theory paper right now. And finally, this is a workshop series where we are working on both personal and professional identity differences, understanding it's not just, the difference between being a doctor and a nurse and a physical therapist, but all the social identities layered on top of that we may need to address if we're going to really successfully engage in change. So just to reflect as we move forward, how does this connect this relational approach to organizational development and change relevant for your research, your teaching, or your consulting? Thanks so much. And over to Lindsey.
Thank you so much, Jody. It was wonderful also for me, and I presume also for the participants here in the webinar to learn more about the relational model of change and also the survey. And I myself am very excited also in reading the systematic literature review you just showed us a short abstract of. So thank you so much for sharing. Did you want to add something? I feel like I interrupted. Or...
No, not at all. I just wanted to
okay.
Lindsey, I can't wait to hear about her work.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Then indeed, I would like to move on to Lindsey, if you would like to take over.
Thank you. It is just a real delight to be here with all of you, and especially some of my dear colleagues, Ignacio and David Bright, who I've had the joy of being collaborative writers and thinkers and partners with over my years. So yes, I'm Lindsey Godwin. I like to say I'm a pracademic. I'm definitely an academic. Grounded my doctoral work was in organizational behavior at Case Western Reserve University, where I had the joy and pleasure of studying and working alongside the thought leaders of appreciative inquiry and emotional intelligence and experiential learning. Just amazing thought leaders in the field. And today I continue to teach and consult and write and try to really sort of bring the work of organizational change to life in both micro and macro ways. And so as we get started in, I wanted to sort of give some context of my own sort of thinking and context setting for appreciative inquiry, and really this approach of appreciative approaches to organizational change, and also this moment that we're in, not just as a field, but as a human community. And I'm curious too, just as we get started, because I know here we are, ODC, the home, the heartbeat of change in our academic community. I'm curious in our text chat, or maybe people can just give me sort of I'm curious always sort of where people are coming into the conversation around appreciative inquiry. In the text chat, I would love for you to just put like a 1. If you have, yes, you've heard, you've read, you've studied appreciative inquiry, give me a 1. If a 2, if you have actually applied, used, or been a part of appreciative inquiry, or a 3, if you really thought, if I said AI, you thought I was talking about artificial intelligence, which is totally the other AI of the day. So I'm curious here. Yeah, we have lots of 1s, 1 point and a 3. Maybe it's a 1.3 for big 2. Some folks have used it 3. Okay. Great. So that just helps me get a sense of Anne-Marie, yes, is obsessed with the prisoner girl. We can talk more, Anne-Marie, after this session. So, all right, that helps me give sort of a sense of where folks are coming in. I appreciate it. Thank you. So lots of things. So appreciative inquiry, lots of different ways it's been defined. This Jackie Stavros and David Cooper are sort of one of the founding thought leaders in appreciative inquiry, again, home out of Case Western Reserve University. And appreciative inquiry really has been described as both a theory and practice of inquiry and change, right? That is adaptable. It's really about asking generative questions, the idea that our questions have impact, that change starts at the very moment we ask a question. It's one of the principles of appreciative inquiry, this idea of simultaneity, right? That change doesn't happen after we do a survey, after we ask a bunch of questions. Change begins the moment we ask a question. And what are the questions we're asking, and how are we asking those questions? What are questions focus us in different ways? And so AI really posits that organizations, that all human systems, whether that's a team, an organization, a community, a country, move in the direction of the questions we most frequently and authentically ask. Sometimes we're asking those questions explicitly, sometimes we're asking them implicitly, but there's always sort of questions are we asking in our organizations, right? And so this idea too, I so appreciate what we're just hearing. It's very much grounded in a social construction, theoretical sort of framing, this idea, just as we were hearing, that we are in relationship. We make, as just as we heard, right, that we are making our realities with one another in relationship constantly together. And so this idea that what we know and how we study and how we communicate and relate to one another, and again, the questions that we ask one another are very important in our organizations. So going forward on the next slide. So at its heart, right, I said there's lots of different definitions. So appreciative inquiry has been written and used around the world in countries all over the world. since the 80s. And so simply put, people are always asking me sort of like, in a nutshell, Lindsey, what is it? And so for me, simply put, it is the search. It's the intentional search for what is life-giving and possible within the people and the world around us. You can click again there, and right with this idea, like I said, that intentionally asking about what we want to accelerate or grow, with the realization that what we appreciate appreciates. And so I do really love, David Cooper-Ryder is brilliant in many different ways, but I really do value the fact that they called it appreciative inquiry, not positive inquiry. We can debunk and get into that, but this word appreciative is an economic term, right? This thing, what do we want to appreciate? What do we want to grow in value? And the idea of what we study, what we ask questions about are the things that we want to grow in value. And so actually, I always like, and David Cooper-Ryder and I continue to work and collaborate. And we just actually recently, this is hot off the press, the February 2024 issue of the AI Practitioner Journal. It's a great research, it's a peer-reviewed journal that is really practitioner focused. And has a lot of different cases and things of people using appreciative inquiry around the world. And David and I were just had the pleasure of being guest editors for a special issue of the journal called Appreciative Inquiry as a Research Method for Qualitative Research and Perspective Theory Building for the Age of Enlivenment. I mean, we can unpack each of those words and what they mean. But in that, David and I wrote and highlighted in one of the articles that we did, and in setting up the introduction to the special issue, a reminder. David calls it appreciative inquiry's lost minor detail, which is actually not that minor. That appreciative inquiry was not originally meant as an applied practice framework. So many of you that maybe have read or even used appreciative inquiry are very familiar with the 4Ds or 5Ds, a process of change with appreciative inquiry. When we talked about, right, defining what we are studying or focusing, inquiring into, defining the change process, discovering the best of what is, dreaming, what do we want the future to be, designing, and then delivering. So that 5D process has really evolved into a change management framework that gets used at micro and macro levels in organizations all over. But originally, I think it's really important, especially for ODC, to remember that appreciative inquiry, that originally in David's original dissertation back in '86, was that appreciative inquiry was an action research methodology for perspective theory building. And that David's dissertation, which really focused on work at the Cleveland Clinic, the first time appreciative inquiry was ever used was actually as a footnote in the work that they did with the Cleveland Clinic to describe the approach that they took in the inquiry with the Cleveland Clinic, where they went in and they were intentionally looking to lift up all of the things that were giving life to that system, from a communications perspective, from a collaboration perspective. When the system was at its best, most flourishing, what were the factors? What were the characteristics? What were the behaviors that people were doing? And so again, this approach that they took was an appreciative inquiry. It's a verb, it's an action, it's something that we do. And so I think that, again, this is a great reminder, especially for our ODC community, as we come in and relook at how appreciative inquiry can inform our work as not just practitioners, but as scholars and theorists as well. So next slide, going forward there. So what is this? So I and others have really sort of looked at trying to, again, sort of take this fact that appreciative inquiry is much more than a 4D framework. It is, as I said, rooted in social construction theory, and there's underlying principles, which, again, some of you have probably read and studied some of those principles. I'm not going to get into all of them today, but I'll be happy to have a conversation and share those with you if you want more details on that. But really, appreciative inquiry in so many ways is an invitation for us to return to the humanistic roots of organization development, right? Organization development as a field was grounded and rooted in this sense of this humanistic, right? How do we bring out the best of individuals, of organizations, of systems? Gervais Bush and others have written, Gervais has written about how appreciative inquiry has really revolutionized the field of OD, and it really was a precursor to the rise of positive organizational studies and the strength-based movement. And even we're seeing in all of our social sciences with the rise of positive psychology now that we're sort of bringing, again, the science of strengths into our organizational life. Bush and Marshak have talked about how appreciative inquiry is really one of the foundational threads of dialogic OD that is really emerging in the field. And this idea, right? Again, back to, I love the conversation we just had of sort of the relational connections and how we create and co-create and recreate our organizational realities through conversations and relationships together. Because appreciative inquiry, the different approaches, whatever methodologies we're using with appreciative approaches, really is about engaging participants in dialogue. And again, but with this non-neutral stance, it's always about sort of inviting people to look at what is the best of what is, but also really to co-envision and co-create what do we want to happen in the future. And so the fundamental question shifts from what has become sort of our diagnostic deficit-based question maybe in the field of what's wrong, how do we fix it, to what do we want to create. And so Jackie Stavros and I and others have begun writing about this again, that appreciative inquiry is less really about something we do, right? It's less about sort of something we do to an organization. And really, we can think at sort of that ontological level that appreciative inquiry is a how we approach things. People have really started bringing appreciative inquiry into all different interventions in organization development, from appreciative team building, appreciative coaching, appreciative strategic planning, right? So it's how do we do the work that we need to do with organizations, but from this intentional perspective, as I said, of focusing and looking at what is life-giving and what is possible, again, with those intentional questions that we're asking that are moving us forward in a generative way. So this is a summary from the article Jackie and I wrote for the Organization Development Review on looking at how appreciative inquiry can really be, in many ways, it's like an operating system for us as OD practitioners, and looking at the strength-based principles of appreciative inquiry, and just, again, all of the strength-based work that is really emerging in our field that really has implications, again, for how we do things as OD practitioners and scholars and theorists, right? This idea that if we do live in worlds that our questions create, then we need to be very intentional and very explicit about the questions that we're asking, because every question we ask is an intervention. And sometimes I think we forget that. And so our questions are very powerful. So being very intentional with our questions, because again, our questions are pointing us in directions. If we excel by amplifying strengths, some of those different things, just back real quick, some of those things, right? Looking at how we frame our work, how we, again, from this idea that this co-creation, the relational reality that we just heard, that really the importance of deliberately working to invite others into conversations is really important as well. So yes, now we can go forward to the next slide. And so I want to sort of then, if this is all sort of appreciative inquiry and what it is and how it can inform our work in terms of how we show up in organizations, what is then the work before us? And David and I have really been writing about this and talking about, right, what are the challenges within our organizations, of course, which I do not need to probably recite for this audience. And really what we've been doing is to invite the field to sort of raise our gaze to that macro level, right? That we are living in this moment as a human community, a global human community. We love this. I love this quote from Alex Steffen in his world-changing book. The moment is clear that we're in right now. Here we are, right? In the next 20, 25 years or so, we need to do something that's never been done before. We need to redesign, just a little thing, redesign the entire material basis of our civilization. The model we replace it with must be drastically more ecologically sustainable, offer increases for prosperity for everyone on the planet, and not only function in areas of chaos and corruption, but help us to transform them. And that task alone is of historic magnitude, but there's one complication, right? We only get one shot. Fail to act boldly, and we may fail completely. At this moment, Dave and I have been talking about this idea that we're in what is called an earth shot moment as a human family. And that all of this work, all of the work that we are seeing, all of the challenges at a global perspective are organization development and change challenges and opportunities, right? We do not lack for technological innovations. We have so much of the technology that we need to address the issues today. What we are in is a collaborative crisis. So it's really the field going forward, right? Dave and I have been talking about this, is that we believe that this moment, as maybe overwhelming as it seems, can also be the finest hour for our field of ODC. This is what organization development and change was created for, was for this work, for the work that we are being asked to do, which again feels much bigger than many of us perhaps are comfortable for, asking us to really look at how do we transform and bring our ODC theories, practices, approaches to challenges that we're seeing in today. David and I have started asking this questions, that what if organizations are not our clients, but instead we really start seeing organizations as agents of change? That agents of change, how are the organizations themselves? How can we help them to become the positive institutions that help create full spectrum flourishing? And so this is sort of, again, trying to raise our thinking from just doing interventions within an organization, but thinking about how the organizations themselves become interventions in the world. And so going forward there, so again, some other recent things just to throw into the mix here briefly. Dave and I have been doing a lot of work on this idea of positive institutions. As I said, this earth shot moment, these are two special issues, other special issues that we were privileged to be guest editors for the Organization Development Review. The One Giant Leap, how OD can help lead the net positive earth shot, and the AI practitioner in discovering and design of positive institutions. Just some great, again, stories, practices, things in there. We define positive institutions in those, right, as these structures that help us to elevate and to magnify and refract our highest strengths out into the world. Again, really getting clear and non-neutral about what is the goal of the end goal of our work in organization development. Isn't just to have effective organizations, it's really to have organizations that are doing this, that are able to be this kind of change in the world. And so just briefly, again, I will highlight, if you haven't, I really will put a selfish plug into the article we wrote on our Earthshot moment. We introduce a lot of different concepts and new definitions for our field. We were honored that this article was named as one of the articles of the year for the OD network. And specifically in it, we really talk about this idea of net positive organization development as a new standard for the field. Again, as this North Star, as a non-neutral stance, that toward what end, right? Toward what end is our work moving toward, with this overarching question that in net positive organizations becomes in every change effort that we're helping to create or support, how is the world better off because your organization is in it? That becomes the guiding question. And sort of following up that from that macro, my bias is I love the macro, but I'm also at heart, my undergraduate degree was in psychology and sociology. So I actually love all the different levels. So I also have a bias of bringing ODC, this macro work at this earthshot level, down to micro practices. And a follow-up article I just recently wrote for Organization Development Review, How Will You Choose to Lead, really starts translating some of that macro earthshot work that David and I wrote about down into micro everyday practices that we can do as organization development leaders. And this includes in our scholarship, right? So this idea, again, that net positive OD leaders, we can each be a net positive OD leader. through holding this intentional stance and commitment to that every interaction, every organization that we're a part of, every research study that we're a part of, every consulting intervention that we're a part of, how are we helping to shape and move things toward this stance that the world is better off because of the work that we've done. And I talk about that through some of the different things, from radical inclusion and radical collaboration, and through literally the words we choose, the questions we ask, and the strategies. And so these are some of the questions. I know we're going to get to questions later. So I'm going to stop and turn it over so we can hear from wonderful Steven and actually get to some conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Lindsey. It was very nice to see also your passion pop through the through the screen. And I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the goals is also to collect resources. And I think you've shared quite a number of resources in terms of your own special issues that you've co-edited. And I myself am also very interested in the study you just mentioned, or the article you just mentioned about bringing ODC macro work to micro practices. So thank you so much. I think this also will give us some nice takeaways for the ODC Hive. And then indeed, I would like to go to our third panelist. So Steven, if I can give you the virtual floor to continue.
Thanks, Melanie. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm super grateful. I think that we have one thing that I wanted to offer, building off of both Jody and Lindsey's talk. I've been working in an area that's looking really at the physiology of change and how it gains up to a societal level. And I think that there is a critical lever that has to be used in order to actually elevate and accelerate what both Jody and Lindsey are advocating for. It's pretty exciting, and it's actually quite shocking. Before I jump in, I just wanted to double check on time. Would it be better for me to wait till another time? Because I think we only have a few more minutes. What would you like to do?
We have 30 minutes left in total.
Okay, cool. Okay, I thought we had less than that. All right, very cool. So I love this because you all set the stage, Jody and Lindsey, you both really set the stage, this passion for our world, the moonshot moment. This is the time. This is our time. But what is the thing? What is that thing that we have to deal with in order for us to go there together? I'm going to talk about that here. I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about what is ODNC, which sets the stage for that. Organization development, and then change management. A lot of you out there that know about change management practices versus organization development practices will identify with the notion that it really is balancing this notion of people and relationship, the people relationship and task and performance. And really this notion of how do we balance the two sides? When you think of organization development and when it added the C in the 1990s to the division, there was a reason for that. And it's about really kind of getting at this notion that we in OD are on the left side, and we're really looking at how do we bring the concrete to it, those items and those qualities that are on the right side. Because when we focus on the people side, we live in a world of ambiguity, which is where our world is right now, where we're leading, engaging, collaborating, understanding, adapting, innovating, solving, and transforming, where we're doing all that work on the left side. You bring in the C. You bring in project management, assessment, evaluation, KPIs, process engineering, quality improvement, performance management. You bring in the managing, directing, acting, complying, adopting, status. You bring in those elements. And we have that balance we have to have. We have to have that balance to bring credibility to our field. That's why I really believe the C is critical to OD. And we bring them together, and that's why the division has done that. Now, when you look at AACSB, I'm going somewhere here with this to this moonshot, this lever, this critical lever for us to take this moonshot. The AACSB is the gold standard accrediting body for colleges of business around the world. When they initiate standards, it changes the best business schools around the world, not all the colleges at all the universities, but it definitely has a changing impact on the businesses and organizations around the world through the curriculum. And you can see what their vision and their focus is on. You can see it's moving into that OD area around societal impact and so forth. What you can see is that they have got these 3 areas that they focus on, which is learner success, strategic management, innovation, and societal impact. And that what they're looking at is really bringing forward the societal impact. And they initiated an initiative, and I was a part of this, and just spoke on a webinar the other day, which I can share with them, that focuses on what are the societal impact leadership competencies necessary to lead this transformational moment that we have in our world. And what they found was, and what we found was, an initial starting point set of competencies. Look at these competencies that they are looking for. They're looking at colleges of business bringing these competencies into their curriculum as core curriculum. And it's going to make a big impact. For those of you that look at colleges of business as being always on the performance task side, you know, and limited and little attention given to the human side of business, you can see right here that is going to change. That is a huge lever for our world. However, we have to think about a few things. 200 plus years ago, the Industrial Revolution brought forward the industrial education agenda, which is called the factory model of learning. You can see here that industrialized education was brought about to create docile employees so they would work in factory settings. You can see the children on the left. During their most formative stages of their lives, we were training their brains to work and become docile employees. That was the total intention. Factory preparation, hierarchical structure, mechanization, Taylorism, rote learning, lecture, passive learning, standardization, age-based classrooms, and a very efficiency focus, lower on Bloom's taxonomy of learning. This is critical for us to understand that what happened is they didn't know it. It was an unintended consequence. By doing that to try to serve industrial revolution, which served a purpose for a while, industrialized education builds what's called crystallized intelligence. It's the back part of the brain. It's where repetition, simple problems and simple solutions, follow rules, isolate, facts and memorization, followership. And that's where in the brain, fight or flight is located, fear, shame, and anger, unhealthy stress responses, and incivility is located if left alone and unchecked. Crystallized intelligence is important, but it can't run the brain. It can't. And what we did is we trained our whole society to be living in this area of crystallized intelligence and not engaging the prefrontal cortex, which is where you got the system 2 level thinking from Kahneman's work around thinking slow and fast, where you got adaptation, complex problems, creating routines, collaboration, innovation, and curiosity, leadership, self-regulation, pro-social behaviors, empathy, emotional IQ, and kindness are located in this area. Healthy stress responses, which are critical to growing the brain. If you have ambiguity and you have challenging tasks and you have unhealthy stress responses, it actually damages the brain. So you have to have healthy stress responses and civility. You got to train people how to do this. So the industrialized education, what it did was it supplanted, it took over the fluid intelligence part of the brain and literally replaced it and was training the crystallized intelligence and ignoring, underutilizing the fluid intelligence area of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. What happens next is the science will tell you simply, by us doing that for 200 years, cognitive impairment and dementia. Here's one research study, just came out about 2 months ago. Routine jobs in people between the ages of 30 and 60 years of age have a 66% increased risk of cognitive impairment and a 37% risk of dementia. In another study, brain shrinkage, when you look at lack of novelty in the job over a 17-year period, literally the prefrontal cortex shrinks. When you look at Montessori versus traditional row and aisle school and education, the brain is not able to operate efficiently. You can take the reverse Flynn effect. They've been tracking IQ over the last 100 plus years now. And what they have found is that we plateaued and we're starting to decrease. They're calling it the reverse Flynn effect. There's some debate about it, but it's definitely there to be talked about. And then you think by 2033, we're going to have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. And all of these people are wrestling with trying to get their brains to re-engage, going into third and fourth career sets, looking for new ways and meaningful ways to make a contribution. What happens next? They're all asking for employees that can do these kinds of things. Like NACE, this is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. This is what they want from graduates. Take it a step further. Add the societal impact leadership competencies and add fluid intelligence. Look at the connection between those three. What is the world asking for right now? And the biggest challenge is, how do we flip it? How do we move from that side to the other side? How do we create learning spaces that mimic the new workspaces and the new world we're trying to create? And how can we do it if the brains have been shrunk, have been hampered, have been set back, and we're trying to unstick the brain? That's the lever. We've got to unstick these brains. We got to get these more, they got to be more plastic or pliable, and we got to create the metaplasticity is what it's called in the brain in order to move from an industrialized education process to a student-centered process, a human-centered approach to learning and organizations. And that student-centered approach on the right-hand side needs to put the prefrontal cortex back in charge of the brain. And we got a lot of work to untrain, rewire, and get people to put it back in the place that it needs to be. We have a lot of work, and it can be done. The research shows that we can make it more pliable. It's most pliable when a child goes through the age of 9 and the teens, when they go through puberty. It's all of those hormones start unfreezing the brain, and they do it. We as adults and the people that are leading the future of our country and trying to set the stage for future generations, we've got to unstick our brains. We can't just expect them to do it and talk to them the way we've been learning. We've got to unlearn how we teach and learn and work. We've got to unlearn it, model it, retrain our brains so that we can hand it off and help the youth come forward and be more ready for a human-centered approach to our world. And so we got to put the PFC back in charge of the brain. And that's flipping the classroom. And if there are those of you that know it, you can flip work. Think of this as flipping a meeting. How many of you go to meetings where you're a talk at meeting? And I can tell you, it's probably about 70% of people spend 70% of their time in meetings. And of that, more than 50 to 70%, more than 50% is a talking at you meeting, if not 70%. Go, listen, be talked at, don't make decisions, and just come to the meeting really not prepared other than to report out. How many people complain about that in meetings? And there's a whole meeting science that's coming out around that. We got to flip it. What if people did pre-work and actually literally utilize their crystallized intelligence to learn, memorize, figure the stuff, understand some things, come into a meeting and sit together and solve the problems together using really good OD&C tools, which can then allow for reflection and growth afterwards. That model right there for the classroom is the same model for work that we need to have. So if everybody cross your arms real quick, cross your arms, cross your arms. You know this, though many of you have done this before, but go ahead, because every time I do it, it's really hard for me. Switch them. Now switch your arms. Okay. Yep. And what some of you might be saying, it feels uncomfortable. Rewiring the brain, engaging the prefrontal cortex is uncomfortable. I love a good workout. I know some people that say, oh, that's so hard, but then they get workout. Oh, I love the sweat. I love a good workout. We have got to learn to love to use our whole brain. And the uncomfortableness becomes something that we feel comfortable with. The uncomfortableness becomes natural, and we love using our brain. And it's not something that goes back to crossing arms back the old way. And so we've got to really find ways to do that. Last but not least, to leave you all with and to let you think about this, is AI, the AI imperative is critical now. And it's going to push OD&C to be the most important profession for our world, the most important academic area for our world. Right now, AI is going to do it for us. It's going to make it a non-issue. We just have got to take the opportunity and step into it, claim it, and put forward all the things that we're doing. The widespread job impact, the global employment exposure, jobs are going to change dramatically. Bloom's lower level hanging fruit, there's going to be bookkeeping is going to go out. People learning how to do bookkeeping, for example, in accounting, advisory skills are going to come in. And how are we going to change the curriculums, and how are we going to change the work and the structure of organizations? To do that, AI is going to push us to use fluid intelligence more. And it's going to put fluid intelligence in a place that it needs to be complemented by crystallized intelligence. So I would offer the following. I would offer the imperative, this AI imperative for our world, for business schools, organizations, communities, and the like. I can change the AI imperative for business and organizations and communities. As a result, it's imperative to prepare the workforce for a world where artificial intelligence will predominate, enabling, even requiring, workers to develop skills quintessentially human and less replicable by AI, such as collaboration, resilience, adaptability, empathy, critical evaluation, creativity, and innovation. The AI imperative is not just a challenge, it is an opportunity to reinvigorate our world with new and exciting dynamics where we can reach our full potential. So I really think that we've got to think about it this way. Go back to that circle, the two circles, the left and the right, the task and the relationship and the task. Go back to the task and the relationship, this balance here. Go back to that and think about, we are bringing OD and C. OD and C is bringing together both sides, business functional skills, personal influence, and human skills, bringing them together so that we can focus on the triple bottom line and societal impact at a much more sustainable, long-term sustainable level for our planet and society. And so I'll leave you with this. HBR had an article, and I love the quote. It said, AI is not going to replace humans, but humans with AI are going to replace humans without AI. And here's what I like to say. I'd like to say, basically, there will be those who manage AI and those who are managed by AI as we move forward. And the business school implication, really, this is the organization development and change imperative implication. It is, we need to help and work on focusing on strategy, structures, and processes, curriculum and learning agendas, faculty, staff, administrators, the organizational members. This is focused on a school, business school, but you can just replace faculty and staff with the people in the organization and the development of employees. Everything has got to change to rewire and empower the fluid intelligence of people, enabling us to all be together in better ways. So thank you. Back over to you, Melanie.
Yes, thank you so much. Very interesting as well, and a very interesting perspective. I myself have learned a lot from what you've shared with us. Yeah, so in terms of time, I guess we can take about 13 minutes for the discussion. The chat is open if you have any specific questions. Unfortunately, up front, I'm almost certain we're not going to be able to go through all of them, but let's see how far we can get. We've also had some questions up front through the registration form, so I guess we can start with those. And David, you do have the slides if you want to share those, but otherwise I have them in front of me here as well. Maybe we can start with a general question. One of the questions was if you have any advice regarding articles or books that are the must-read foundations for anyone wishing to build credibility in organizational development and change. And maybe also nice, how can we distinguish ODC from organizational behavior? Maybe we can start with this more general question. Is there one of you who would like to start?
If I could, Melanie, I'd like to suggest we focus on that second question.
Second, yeah, sure.
You know, what are our beliefs about OD and where is it headed over the next 5 years? I think that all three of these perspectives give us kind of a provocative window into, you know, the relational space, the methods, potential methods through Lindsey's, and then Steve's gives us kind of a call for action that kind of hits at the systemic level as well. So I'd like to suggest we start there. So what do you think?
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And if I might, Jody, would you mind? I'd love to get your reaction on that question, particularly from the perspective of how you have understood OD and OD&C to this point in your experience.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot to take on because I've really resonated with Lindsey's and Steve's presentation. So I think we do share this sense that that OD is very much dependent on a relational underpinning, and that it impacts us at this micro level. For example, Steve was talking about the way our brains are activated depending on what is happening and the way we're trained and the way we're taught and our organizational context. But as Lindsey pointed out, we're also affecting each other in every moment with every question we ask. And so I will just share one visual that I really think is nice for capturing this, see if it comes up. Yeah. I go back to Barbara Fredrickson and this whole thing of positive emotions. And my take on her work is that positive relationships evoke positive emotions, and that activates a more advanced part of our brains, thus supporting learning and innovation, all the kinds of things that Steve was saying. And so how we communicate and relate with each other can impact us at the very micro level for better or worse. And for better is when we engage in these kinds of communicating and relating, and for worse is in this. And so I think this multi-level view of ODC will be very helpful, that we can recognize that in effect, we can be the change we wish to see in the world, but we also need, as Lindsey said, for our organizations themselves to become interventions in the world, right? So I'm not really a micro person like you, Lindsey, but I think ultimately that's where it starts. And that there is this cycle of influence between organizations and individuals in order to impact this larger world that we're all, I'm really thrilled to see how interested we all are in that larger impact. So I saw more similarities across the presentations than I may have expected, in a sense that, so I would say ODC is headed in a kind of a multi-level direction, recognizing the role of individuals, organizations, and this larger institutional context. And that maybe that's enough for now, but that interventions, I see appreciative inquiry as a very powerful interventional methodology for shifting relationships and the way we think about the problems that we're facing. So over to you guys.
Yeah, can I jump on that, Jody? I so appreciate it, and just resonate. See, Jody, we need to have lots of coffee and chats together. Oh. And I think that, David, to your question, I think that in the next 5 years, and hopefully even sooner, I think OD is starting to see this of really owning, as we said, sort of, I think OD, and just building on what Steven said in terms of, we are this field, this is the work that the world is calling for. I think this is the most important, as Steve was saying, sort of, whether that's division in the academy, sort of all of the different things, this is the work. And I think that shift is also going to go from sort of from owning and realizing that this is the work the world's calling for. And something you just said, Jody, too, of I think the shift from realizing too that in our theory and our research, it's less about trying to explain what is or has been, and really realizing in this sense of co-creation and in the work, and I know, Ignacio, you're getting into this too, the idea of we are prospective theorizers. Our work actually creates the world. So it's less about sort of defining and describing what has been, and really recognizing, just as you're saying, Jody, through the relationships, through the questions we ask, through the theories that we propose, it's less about defining and describing, just as Steven was even saying, sort of, you know, we know what and why of the past. It's really about this idea of prospective theorizing and creating through our theory and living into the future we want. Marty Seligman's work, sort of, this Homo perspective. So we are one of the only creatures that can really sort of have images of the future that we can articulate and can move into that. And again, Steven's work has so put forward sort of an image for me of how do we change into that. But I think that's where the field is going and needs to go in terms of our realization that that our work isn't just critical, but it's imperative in the sense that, and that we have the power to actually not just describe, but actually co-create in that perspective manner.
Okay, thank you so much. Steve, would you like to add something to this?
No, those were some really important points that were made. Is there a follow-on question maybe that I could add to now that as you heard what they said, is there something that you would add on top of that?
Let me see. Well, maybe we can have a follow-up from the chat. I'm not really sure if it's a similarity. Sorry.
Go ahead, Melanie. You're about to read what I was going to read. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Meyer has an interesting comment.
A similarity I see in all three presentations are that OD is moving towards challenging many of the basic ontological assumptions of previous management and organization scholarship. Is this something you agree with, Steve?
Yeah, I think it's. I would just offer that when you go back to the history and the beginnings, we're teasing out a lot of we're finding through our research and through our action research and through our practical, we're finding what works. I think the basic assumptions have always been there. I think, ending human suffering, creating a world where people are just kinder and better together. It's really simple. And the tools for us to relate better to each other, it's just simple, yet it is elusive. And I think that we are really trying to find our way back to some things that we lost because of the last 200 years. I think our education system has really set our society back. And not in a bad way that it was wrong. I just think it worked for a while, but now it's like absolutely counter to everything that we need. So the basic ontology are there. When you look at Lewin's original research study, what did he look at? He was there with Ian Lippitt. I think it was Lippitt's dissertation. You can Google it on the YouTube. They're looking at democracy, laissez-faire, and autocracy with young boys in like the Boy Scouts or something like that. And they're looking at making that case about how people relate and work together. So I would say that our assumptions are the same. Our understanding of what works has changed dramatically because we're finding better things that work and better ways of explaining it. And I think it's going to be really important that we understand what has happened and with what we know now. Just use the analogy of sickness and penicillin 200 years ago, 300 years ago. People explained sickness in certain ways without understanding what was going on. We now explain it in different ways based on what we've learned. And we're learning better what works. And that should be our goal.
I would have to agree with Steve. It's understanding the desired state is really critical, but also is understanding the current state. And then what's how do we experiment to get from one to the other? Mm-hmm. But that kind of understanding and seeing together where we are. You don't want to stop there for sure, which can happen, but it does seem important. And it's part of that kind of, bringing OD and the task part together, that kind of, that discipline of process improvement where you do start with where we are, but don't stop and don't just do incremental, do like, what is the desired state?
Yeah. And I would just offer real quick that action research, I hope it gets its renaissance more so in our work, and that we help leaders and people working in organizations to understand that the mindset of when you walk in the room, you are coming in, and if you want to affect things in a positive way or how you want to affect things, you have a hypothesis in your mind and you are experimenting in that moment to try to make a difference. It's that simple. It's nothing more. So the question becomes, how do you do it intentionally? And how do you do it so that you can see what happened and use some of the data that we have now, not in complicated ways, but in very simple ways to just objectively learn, reflect, and learn. If we could do that and understand, all of you are action researchers, if you're in the system and you want to take an intentional approach and you want to understand what happened and you want to improve it for next time around, you're an action researcher in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you so much. Considering the time, I don't think we have the opportunity to go into another question, but maybe I can ask each of you, and I think Steve has already kind of started this, but maybe to end with a takeaway for our participants before we end the session. So maybe Lindsey can just a brief takeaway to our participants.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, I so resonate and echo with what Steven just said, that we're always operating on hypotheses, and all of our work, our organizations, our life in many ways it's an iterative design process. And so I think for all of us, it is sort of stepping in and just as Steven said, I would echo that, being intentional. And I think that each of us, again, have the ability to remind ourselves of that intentionality in our work as scholars, practitioners, as family members, as community members. We are agents of change. We are in relationship, starting with ourselves. What is the inner conversation that you are having, and the questions and the words you are using with your own internal narrative, let alone in every relationship that you're having. So I think it's that bringing that intentionality of our words we use, the questions we ask, the strategies that we suggest, and how are we doing that? Again, for me, it's very much in this recognition that not only is everything an intervention, but nothing is neutral. So how are we always sort of intentionally bringing that toward, moving toward the what do we want to be creating, not just away from what we don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Jody, do you have anything to
add?
I don't know
what to add to, I don't know what to add to all of that. But I do love the resonance here. I just would reiterate what I'm hearing here, which is that we do have to, we have to be the change we wish to see. And it's not just that simple, because it's the experimentation of, well, what happens when we do that? And does it actually work? And, that cycle of experimentation that actually is part of the relational model of change. And I'll just share this visual one more time. I was inspired to do this work process interventions by that very idea that you can't just improve something by making it a little bit better. You have to know where you're going, and then is your experimentation taking you there? So identifying the desired state is actually a critical piece of the kind of change that we're talking about, whether it's at the individual level or group or organization or our society level. And I guess I would also invite people to join multiple intersecting communities. ODC is a wonderful community, and I also invite you to consider the Relational Coordination Collaborative. And we're meeting in every year. We meet once in person in Berkeley this year, and it's called Seeing the Whole Together, because I do think part of our challenge in this day is to see ourselves as part of an interdependent whole, because we can become so fragmented and so isolated, which makes it hard to create change. So yes, seeing the whole together, and how do our different interventions help us to do that more effectively?
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think both Lindsey and Jody have also added some resources and ideas into in the chat as well. So make sure to have a look there as well. Well, before I round off, I want to thank our three panelists for kicking off this first webinar in our webinar series on scholarly foundations of ODC. Thank you so much. I think it was very inspiring and very useful for us as a division, for people that are new to division, people that already been in the division for years. So it's great to have you here. Thank you so much for this. And to the participants, thank you so much for joining us. I think seeing the reactions in the chat, it's been inspiring and very insightful for you as well. So this is wonderful. What we would like to ask you as organizers, and I will put it into the chat right now, If you have any feedback or would like to share your experience on this first webinar, please let us know. As I mentioned, it's a webinar series, so we're going to organize more. So any feedback or suggestions you have moving forward would be a great help to us. David has recorded the meeting, so we will also place this on the ODC website. And I think with this, we can conclude this first webinar. And I wish everyone a wonderful remainder or start of the day.
Bye.
You.
See you in Chicago.
Bye. See you all.
Look forward to meeting you guys in person.
Awesome.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Melanie. You did an amazing job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Really fun. Thanks.
Bye. Nice to see you all. Thank you.
Bye, Ignacio. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, Melanie. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you too. Bye.